안녕하세요. KJ 선생님이에요. 수업이 시작할까요? Welcome back to another episode of Learn Korean with Teacher KJ. I know it's been a long time since I last uploaded an episode for this series, but because of the necessity of times, I finally had the perfect excuse to get on with recording this. So we are going to continue with the last lesson in learning Hangul, which is on Batsim final consonants. In the previous episodes, we have already learned basic consonants, aspirated consonants, and tense consonants. And yes, you've already gotten to know all of the consonant characters that you need. However, in the Korean alphabet, the final consonants sometimes behave differently when they are found at the end of syllables. So that's what we're going to learn today. The basic structure of all syllables is a minimum of a consonant plus a vowel. But there are cases when syllables would have to be a combination of a consonant, vowel, and another consonant. And there are certain nuances in pronouncing these final consonants. So let's begin. Our first final consonant sound is this one. And there are actually 3 final consonants that is pronounced this way if you find them at the end of our syllables. Starting off with this one, of course. Like in the word subak, which means watermelon, obviously it has to be pronounced as g. Once again, this word is pronounced as subak. Another final consonant sound that should be pronounced as k is this consonant. Yes, this is an aspirated consonant as an initial consonant sound, but when we find it at the end of syllables, it's just pronounced like its basic counterpart. For example, in the word puok, which means kitchen, you don't really hear the aspiration anymore. Once again, it's pronounced as puok. And finally, the last consonant sound that needs to be pronounced as k is this one. And from our last lesson, you know that this is a tensed consonant as an initial consonant sound. But when we find it at the end of syllables, like in the word pak, which means outside, it doesn't have to be tensed anymore. Once again, this word is pronounced as pak. This is our next final consonant sound, and you don't need to be confused at all because whether it's an initial consonant sound or a final consonant sound, it remains the same. Like for example, in the word an, which means inside. Same goes with the word nun, which means 2 things in Korean. It can either mean your eyes or snow. And of course, this last word, which I'm sure you're familiar with, it reads as honmun, which of course you know from watching K-Pop Demon Hunters. Honmun comes from 2 words. The first one, hon, related to anything about the soul or the spirit, while the word mun could mean a door or a gate. So, technically speaking, honmun translates as a soul door or a spirit gate, which of course it's its function in the movie. Now let's move on to this next final consonant. A lot of our consonants are pronounced this way as a final consonant sound. Of course, starting with this one. Like in the word batsim, which is the title of this lesson. Batsim, once again, means final consonants. Our next final consonant is this one, which as you know, is an aspirated consonant as an initial consonant sound. But as a final consonant sound, it's just sounded like its basic counterpart, like in the word 끝, which means the end. This consonant is also pronounced as t as a final consonant sound, like in the word 뼈, which means the bones or the core. Similarly, this consonant is also pronounced as t as a final consonant sound, like in the word ita, which means to have. Even this consonant is pronounced as t as a final consonant sound, like in the word nat, which means afternoon. So if this basic consonant is pronounced as t as a final consonant, so will its aspirated counterpart, like in the word bit, which means light or glow. And finally, the last letter that is pronounced also as t as a final consonant is this one, like in the word 좋다, which means to be good. This is our next final consonant sound. As an initial consonant sound, it's usually sounded as the r sound. But as a final consonant, it's closer to the l sound. Like for example, in the word tal, which means daughter, or in the word mul, which means water, or in the word kil, which means street or path. Our next final consonant is pretty easy because it sounds the same as an initial and final consonant sound. So let's look at some sample words. The first one is pam, which means night. The next one reads as maum, which means heart or feelings or emotions. And the last sample word is him, which means strength. That's why there's this encouraging expression in Korean, which is 힘내세요, which is like please have strength or have strength when you are going through difficult times or challenging situations. Our next final consonant is this one, which of course you know is pronounced as p. And there are two consonants pronounced this way when they appear at the end of syllables. Starting of course with this one, like in the word 집, which means house, and in the word 갑자기, which means suddenly. And I'm sure you're familiar with this because it often appears in a lot of K-pop song lyrics. The next final consonant pronounced as p is this one. We all know that as an initial consonant sound, it's aspirated, but as a final consonant sound, it's not. Like in the word up, which means in front or forward. And of course, we have this final consonant, which as an initial consonant sound is silent. But when placed at the end of syllables, it's pronounced as ng. Like in the word kung, which means a palace. Or the word sang, which means an award. And in the word 영원, which means forever or eternity. Like in the English language, there are also instances where two consonants will come one after the other. And in cases like that, most of the time, only one of the consonants will be pronounced. Like for example, in the combination of these two final consonant sounds, you only pronounce the k sound. Like in the word nok, which means soul. And in the combination of these two final consonant sounds, you only need to pronounce n. Like in the word anta, which means to sit. In this combination of final consonants, you only need to pronounce p. Like in the word yodol, which is 8 in one of the Korean number systems. And then we have this combination of final consonants. You only need to pronounce l, like in this word, which is read as wegol, which means single-minded. We also have this combination of final consonants, and when it happens, you only need to pronounce the first one, which is l, like in the verb halta, which means to lick something, like an ice cream or a popsicle. When you see this combination of final consonants, you only need to pronounce the first one, which is p, like in the word opta, which means to not have anything, or in Filipino, wala. In this final consonants combination, you only need to pronounce the first sound, like in the word 싫다, which means to not like something. When you see these final consonants at the end of your syllable, you only need to pronounce the k sound. Like in the word duck, which means chicken. And I'm sure you're familiar with this. You've heard this before, especially if you bought the buldak ramyeon or the spicy noodles. Buldak literally means fire chicken. So the next time you go to a Korean grocery store, make sure to spot this word. And finally, when you see this final consonants combination, you pronounce it as p, like in the word upta, which means to recite. Now that you know your final consonants and you've gotten introduced to all of the Hangul characters, I think it's time to put it into practice. And since I already mentioned K-pop Demon Hunters, why don't we take it from there? We are going to look at the Korean lyrics from the song Golden, which is one of the most popular songs from that movie's OST. And as we look at those lyrics, not in their romanized spelling, but in their Hangul spelling, we are going to try and pronounce them correctly, and at the same time, we are also going to translate them so that the next time we are going to do our very own karaoke, we already know how to pronounce them correctly, and we even know what it means. In the first stanza, the one sang in Korean is the line 어두워진 앞길 속에. One more time. 어두워진 앞길 속에. The word 어두워진 means to be dark, and in the word 앞길 속에, you can actually dissect it into three parts. The word 앞, as we've learned earlier, means in front or forward. The word 길 means path, and 속 means to go in that direction. So when you combine this entire line, it means in the darkened path ahead. The next lyric sang in Korean was from Mira's lines, and it's read as 끝 없이. 끝 없이. As we learned earlier, 끝 means to stop or end. It can essentially mean you're endless or limitless. So Mira is essentially saying you can't stop her when she's on stage. So maybe you're going to ask, 선생님, why are we pronouncing this one as 끝없이 if we have this final consonant which, as you said earlier, is supposed to be only pronounced as p? In cases where a syllable ending with a consonant sound is followed by a syllable that begins with a silent consonant, or essentially a vowel sound, what happens is that the silent consonant borrows the sound of the previous final consonant. So instead of dissecting this word into three syllables by saying 끝, op, i, you blend the sounds together and it becomes 끝없이. So this Korean lyrics is pronounced as 끝없이. Next line that contains Korean lyrics that we can find in this song is in the chorus, and it reads as 영원히 깨질 수 없는. One more time. 영원히 깨질 수 없는. As we've learned earlier, 영원 means forever or eternity, and when you say 영원히, it means eternally. 깨질 수 없는 came from the root verb 깨다, means to break something. And when you say 깨질 수 없는, it means it can't be broken. So when you look at this line as a whole, it can mean can never ever be broken or unbreakable for all eternity. I would like to quickly zero in on the last word in this line, which, as I said, is pronounced as 없는. So maybe you're going to ask, since it comes from the word 없다, why is it not pronounced as 없는? In this word, the second syllable begins with a nasal sound, n. So it will be easier if the sound prior to it will also be pronounced nasally. So instead of saying op, 는, you say 없는 instead for ease of pronunciation. Once again, this line reads as 영원히 깨질 수 없는. And the last line in this song that is sang in Korean is this line which reads as 밝게 빛나는 우리. Once again, 밝게 빛나는 우리. The first word in this line, 밝게, means brightly. The second word here is pronounced as 빛나는, which means shining. And while yes, it comes from the root word 빛, as we learned earlier, again we pronounce this one as 빛나는 because the second syllable again begins with the nasal sound n. So for ease of pronunciation, it became 빛나는. So essentially, this line would translate as we who are shining brightly, or our brightly shining selves. And that concludes our lesson on 받침 or final consonants, and that also wraps up all of our lessons in Hangul. I know we learned a lot of difficult things today, but you know what to do. Just go back to this video if there's anything that's confusing for you and continue practicing. What other Korean songs do you need help with in terms of pronunciation? Let me know, because sometimes their romanized counterparts do not actually represent correctly how they are supposed to be pronounced in the nuances of the Korean language. Thank you for joining me in Learn Korean with Teacher KJ today. 오늘은 잘했어요. 감사합니다. 안녕히 가세요. Call the problem child, 'cause I got too wild. But now that's how I'm getting paid. Could she on stage? I feel like